speaking of US, it takes me back to Hollywood. It's more of a doubt than a question. We've seen movies, mostly sci-fi movies like Lucy, which comes to mind. There is there's that movie quotes that we haven't unlocked 100% of our brain's potential. Is that a true statement, or is it that we haven't uncovered its potential, like the ocean, we're still researching it? Is it like that? I would
Yeah,
like to
I like
have you
your
clear it up.
second statement. Yeah. I like your second statement. So what is actually true is probably we don't understand the brain enough. What we're limited by is our own understanding of the brain. So I haven't seen Lucy myself, but I did do a quick synopsis read up of what the plot is about. So this seems to be like a regular myth that has somehow stuck with neuroscience. I and I think it has been wrongly also attributed to Einstein, having said that we were only using 10% of our brain's potential. That is not true. We have to use our whole brain throughout the day. So we are using different parts of our brain at different points in time through the day, but at the end of it, we are using our whole brain to its full potential. And that has to be done for us to function normally. So if there are regions of the brain that are affected and are not functioning properly, they are associated with neurological and neuropsychiatric disorders. Having said that, it's important to also know that it's not just during our waking hours, but even when we are asleep, our brain is still functioning. So we have fMRI studies. So fMRI basically looks at brain activity, and uh, you what scientists have shown is that even when you're asleep or when you're doing meditation, right, which is supposed to be like the calmest point of the time for you, your brain is still active and it is consuming energy. So basically, you can never stop thinking. You're always active. Your brain is always active, whether you know it or not. Yeah, the only part that I would talk about is the fact that you can, like, you even this movie talks about it, that there are these drugs that possibly can increase your potential to or of your brain to function. The That is not entirely true, is how I would put it. So the brain is basically your way to perceive the world, right? So you have the world outside you, and these in turn act on our various receptors, which could be eyes, ears, tongue, skin. And all this information that we are gathering from the outside world is converted into electrical signals. And then the brain basically reconstructs the world from these electrical signals. What At the end of the day, what you're perceiving is just is an outcome of electrical activity. So if you change electrical activity in certain parts of the brain, you can change your perception of the world. And which, of course, some hallucinogenic drugs, for example, too. So, like, for example, LSD or cannabis or ayahuasca, right? It is not that there is something extra that is being opened up in your brain that your body couldn't access before, but just that it's altering electrical activity in your brain. Uh, yeah, and the other thing is we are limited by our senses of perception, and the world is far more complex, right? So, for example, when we see a rose, we see its bright red colors and its petals and its nice green stem and leaves. When if you could ever ask a bee what it is seeing, it's not seeing the rose the way we are seeing it. It's not even looking at the same colors that we are looking at, because a bee looks at things in the UV spectrum. It's not using the visible range. So your nervous system determines your construction of the world around you. And so if you can change and alter the activity of the nervous system, you can change your perception of the world. But that doesn't mean that this ability didn't exist, or these drugs are opening up some extra windows to the world. So that's not true.
Also, you mentioned about ayahuasca. I think it's a psychedelic drug, right?
Psychedelic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, like, how do these drugs like work on the chemistry of the brain? Like, because I've heard people do it for I don't know, for like some kind of uh, spiritual thing. So like I'm
Yeah.
not like we are always taught that drugs are bad for you, but like this one is kind of considered as a good drug, is what I've heard. So like how does that work on our brain?
Right. So again, as I mentioned, so there are ways by which human beings experience hallucinations, right? So some of the hallucinations even normal people experience. So this could be, for example, just before you go to sleep, you are in that dreamlike state where you're seeing things. Those are tiny hallucinations, right? Um, there are instances where, for example, you've lost a very dear person. And people sometimes, I think about 50% of people actually report after bereavement that they're able to either hear their loved one or they're able to see them. Often that's attributed to, or maybe their spirit is around us. But this is another form of hallucination, right? This is the way by which your brain is probably trying to cope with this hole that has been suddenly generated in your environment. So these are good hallucinations. Like they help you to cope um, with the changing environment. And over time, you of course stop um, seeing and hearing these voices because now your system has adapted to the loss, right? Then of course there are hallucinations that are generated because of diseases like, for example, epilepsy. Right, and in many cultures, and including in India, you would see that there are these people who will suddenly dress up like the goddess, and they're in this ecstatic state. And I think it's called Mata, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so that's a hallucination state which is generated because of what is called as ecstatic epilepsy. It's actually a neurological problem that needs to be treated. But because it's ecstatic, the person who is having it is thought to be in an elevated state. That's probably that person actually needs help. So this is the disease aspect of hallucinations. And then of course you have these drug-based hallucinations, right? And you see this in many cultures. So ayahuasca, which is there in the Amazonian culture. Then I'm not sure, but there is, of course, like for example, the description of soma in Vedic culture might have been has been proposed probably that it is some sort of mushrooms that were taken for hallucinogenic effects. So these, as I mentioned, are drug-induced hallucinations, which are altering the neural activity. So they contain active compounds, like for example THC, that alter the firing in your brain. And normally, for example, in when we are awake, there are certain parts of our brain that are suppressed, and that allows you to work very consciously with your environment. And when you are, for example, if you're asleep, then these various parts of the brain interact much more with each other, and this is proposed to be involved in like for example bringing concepts that otherwise don't fit together is something you would suddenly come up with a eureka moment, whether in your restful state. And that's because these brain regions that normally are not communicating with each other in your awake state are now able to communicate with each other in the sleep state. Right. So that's why you would see many people just immediately get up from their sleep and will write down, I had this epiphany while I was asleep, or when I was meditating. So these drugs allow you to reach that state while you are awake. And so that's how these drugs are working. But they're not opening, again, just to clarify, they're not opening anything new. Your neural substrate is already there, it's already capable of doing it. It is just allowing you to reach that state when you are awake and at will.